I'm Jake Bruden, and welcome to the UnBuild It podcast. Before we get started today, I want to give a special thank you to Huber Engineered Woods, our sponsor for today's episode. And rather than talk about their products or their customer service like we normally do, I want to make you aware of something that's happening at the International Builder Show. The first day of the International Builder Show this year, Tuesday, February 25th, at 10:30 a.m., join myself, Steve Basic, and Huber's own Nick Sable at booth C3320. That's C3320, 10:30 a.m. We're going to be talking about rain screens for resilience. Everything rain screen. We're going to be covering everything that has to do with rain screens in one conversation. Myself, Steve Basic, and Huber's Nick Sable. You do not want to miss this conversation. It's going to be super informative, crowd participation, everything you've ever wanted from a rain screen conversation. Be there or be square. Huber, thanks for sponsoring, and we hope to see you guys at IBS. Welcome to the UnBuild It podcast. Today, I have none of my normal co-hosts. It is just me, but I have a guest. My guest today is Christine Williamson. Christine, thanks for joining me.
I'm glad to be. You're joining me, actually.
I am actually joining you. I'm actually sitting in your office at Virginia Tech. And so thank you for letting me use the space. And because it's an architecture school, you don't get walls that go all the way to the ceiling.
Indeed not.
So if you hear people in the background working, blame the designers and the architectures in the architecture school for being open to collaboration, I guess, is the way they probably explained it.
Free flow of ideas.
Okay. So for those of you that for our listeners that don't know you, I'm going to let you kind of introduce yourself. So how would you, your Instagram is not as active as it used to be.
It is not.
Normally I would just say Building Science Fight Club, but how do you introduce yourself nowadays?
Well, believe it or not, I was a whole fully developed person prior to social media, prior to Instagram. But yes, I am the creator of Building Science Fight Club on Instagram, but I have not posted in 2 years because I've been very busy growing humans inside my body. Most recently, 3 humans all at once. And for family reasons, not for science reasons or anything? Not for science. Well, I don't know. When you're a building scientist, I guess it's all, life is always an experiment. But these days I'm a professor at Virginia Tech. I'm assistant professor of architecture at Virginia Tech. And so I teach students about building science and construction and all the fun stuff that you talk about every week. And I do it with people early in their careers, as opposed to what I used to do, which was teaching and consulting for practicing professionels. People that have already screwed it up a little bit? Maybe, or those who desire not to. So, I mean, every building is a prototype, as John Straub likes to point out. And so we're always learning from things that we've done before, whether we consider them like full-on mistakes or not. But yes, to people who have been humbled by life in day-to-day practice. So this is a bit of a change for me, but it's a very welcome one. It's nice to be in school and equipping students with the types of skills that I certainly didn't have and my classmates didn't have in architecture school. So I hope to change a little bit of that. I was super impressed today. I sat in on one of your classes and you ended the class by saying, like, we thought we were going to change the world and we didn't. And you have the opportunity to change the world. You should, kind of thing. And I was just like, wow, that's kind of the way I feel about it. Like, our generation thought we were going to do something different, and we had LEED and Passive House coming and all these things. And like, nobody does it and nobody does it well. And there are people that care about it and they just turn into disciples, and it doesn't go very far. And, even you get companies like my company building 4 houses a year, not making much of an impact on the world, sort of thing. So I think it's great that you're here, and there were 120 kids sitting in there today. Yeah. And this is my first year, right? So I teach the whole cohort, and this is just my first year. So it will be nice to see each cohort, and I have them for a year, which is nice too. So have each cohort graduate with a head start. I don't know all of building science to even teach them,
Sure.
but to get a head start. I think architecture education is, I think, a lot closer to more of a fine arts program than a lot of people maybe realize. And I would say probably most architecture graduates from when I was a student 20 years ago to today, I think it's safe to say that they graduate not really knowing very much about how to build even a house. And that's something I'd like to change is, okay, well, let's start just with that. How do we build a house? And with the approach I take with my students is I start with what's common and typical, and I want them to understand those systems inside and out and develop for them a framework so that afterwards they can learn variations on that theme. So we start, for example, what I mean by that is we start with the standard cavity insulated wall. So 2x6 framing, cavity insulation, exterior sheathing, WRB, drainage space, ventilation space, and cladding. And we go through over several weeks. It takes us a long time to really go through this, the principles of water management, air management, thermal control, vapor control, condensation control. We go through those. The idea is for them to understand how that particular wall behaves with respect to the things we want our enclosure to do, and they should know it inside and out, and how it's built and who builds it and the order it's constructed in and how to draw it, what it looks like. And so we take our time with it. It's hopefully fun.
I think it's also super important to simply acknowledge that they have a professor that just quoted John Straub too.
I quote him a lot.
When we talk about the idea of like, Steve always waves his hands around and says architect, like a conductor, like he uses a pejorative, like architect, like it's only art. It's not actually the real world sort of thing. Like, and it has to be somewhere in between just being what
sculpture.
Yeah.
And being and utilitarian.
Yeah. It has to be somewhere in between the two for it to actually exist. It's not just Frank Gehry, and it's not just building a block building that has no windows because that's going to be durable. Efficient.
Yeah, we would do a sphere because it's the most efficient surface area to volume ratio. Come on, Jake, you know this.
So I was inspired today, so thank you for letting me sit in on your class. Glad. And I enjoyed the case study that we got to sit through too. And as soon as you put up the picture and I saw that the concrete was chamfered, I thought that's not what it looks like in the drawings, because the drawings showed it as being a squared edge pour, and I was like, that's not going to.
How are they going to do that?
Yeah. So we've had a ton of listeners write in questions, and I thought it would be really funny to, fun to
it
bring.
It might also be funny. We'll see.
To bring questions to you, just like we've been answering on the podcast a lot lately, and just blind you with questions and answer questions just like you're one of the regular hosts, because you basically have the same expertise that we bring to the table.
Maybe. So, I will qualify this by saying that I have been not practicing for 2 years.
Fair.
So
and you don't know what the questions are.
I do not know. So, these are cold. So now that we've qualified that.
Yeah. And you have the ability to go, I don't want to answer that one if you want. How about that?
All right.
Okay, the first question comes from Sean. We don't read last names just in case we end up making fun of people. That also happens when Peter and Steve are here, so I'm going to assume that's not going to happen as much today. I love the show. I've listened to all the podcasts, and I can't seem to find a discussion on this topic. I also have not seen a topic brought up. That's an oddly. We're going to skip that sentence. Sorry, Sean. If the purpose of sufficient exterior insulation is to maintain the sheathing temperature above dew point in a cold climate, then why isn't Zip R an exception to this?
That's a great question.
The condensing surface, or the sheathing on Zip R, is outside the insulation and is opposite from what the intent appears to be for the code. Having said that, is the thickness of the insulation as important with the Zip-R when compared to traditional sheathing with exterior insulation? So there's kind of two questions there.
There's more than two questions there, but yes, that's a great question.
The first part is, and we hear this all the time, isn't Zip-R backwards for continuous exterior insulation?
Yes, well, sort of. Okay. So first, we will declare that there are actually some students present listening, so who might not know what Zip-R is. So let's describe what it is. Some of your listeners might not know it either. So Zip-R is an integral sheathing plus water and air control membrane. So they take a sheathing material like OSB, and Zip-R is that this is a particular manufacturer. The manufacturer's name is Huber, and so they
sponsored. Huber's a sponsor.
There you go. I
should say that before Christine answers the question.
Well, they don't sponsor me.
No, I'm kidding.
But I do like them a lot. They're very nice. And actually, I just called them up the other day saying, send me stuff that you have lying around in your your R&D lab so I can show my students and talk about it. But anyway, so you've got a sheathing product like OSB, and they coat it in the factory with a fluid coating that makes it, we use that coating as the water control and air control membrane for our exterior wall. So that's the normal Zip. Zip-R takes that same sheathing product and adheres insulation on the back of it. So the interior face of the sheathing. And we use this product. It's really, really kind of neat. So we use it the way we use standard sheathing products. And it means that we have insulation continuously outboard of the studs, outboard of the framing, but it's still inboard of the
structural sheathing in most cases.
The structural sheathing. So it's outboard of the studs, so we don't get our thermal bridging from any studs, but it's inboard of the sheathing itself, the exterior insulation. And doesn't that violate our principle of condensation control, where ideally we want all of our insulation on the exterior of our control layers? And the answer is yes, it does violate that. This is not the perfect wall, so to speak, or the perfect conceptual wall. It's still an awesome approach, though, and here's why. First, back up, though. Why would we do this? Why would we want to do this? And one of the reasons that it's so helpful to use this type of product is that it allows you to get the performance benefits, or some of the performance benefits, of continuous exterior insulation, thermal and comfort benefits, with sort of minimal change to construction sequencing and architectural detailing. So there's some change, it's minimal change, in that your windows still get installed the same way. You don't need an additional trade to install the insulation that comes afterwards and has to be coordinated with your glazing contractor, with other stuff. So it allows you to improve your performance and increase, or maybe meet an increased code requirement without having to do too much different on a project. And different on projects equals risky. Anything different is risky. That doesn't mean not worth it. It just means risky. So it's a low risk way of sort of dipping the toe in the water of exterior insulation, which is great. Anyway, what's the problem with it, or potential problem with putting insulation on the interior face of the sheathing? The problem is that we might not use enough insulation. And this is actually pretty difficult to communicate. I'm not really sure how Huber does it. Huber, you should hire me. I'll communicate it. Well, now I'm like setting myself up for a job interview here. Maybe I should just answer the question. So what ends up happening is we care about two things. One, we want to make sure that interior moisture-laden air in the wintertime is separated from and does not reach the sheathing, the exterior sheathing, which is still cold. And we can be reasonably sure that that will actually happen with a product like Zip-R, because the joints of the sheathing, which are sealed from the outside but not the inside, but those joints, the panel joints, occur over framing members for the most part. So we get, and they're held in compression against the studs. So we get very little air leakage through those joints. Now, some joints aren't. We'll have some horizontal joints.
But for the most part, horizontal joints end up getting blocked because you're getting structural rating out of it. In our case, most cases, most people are blocking those joints as well.
So either you don't have very many of them, or they're being blocked. Now, if you really feel uptight about it, you could use the fluid approach to instead of using a tape to seal these joints on the exterior. You can use Huber's fluid membrane, which is more vapor permeable, so you'll get a little bit of exterior drying at the joints where you get.
And they make a VP tape now too.
Oh, do they? I did not know. Look, see, I've been out of the game for a while. So you could use you could get a little drying in the places where you need it. Now, this is sufficient for most residential construction. It is not sufficient for special use buildings that are humidified. So you would not want to do this approach on an indoor pool, or even a part of a typical building or typical residential build that is more humid, like say you've got a steam shower or really any bathroom, maybe not a powder room, but a bathroom. I would want to have some supplemental interior vapor control or exterior insulation at those locations. So it's appropriate for lots and lots of cases, but it would be inappropriate in some cases. I think the easiest, I'm searching for a word that I can't think of anyway. Product similarity would be to interior spray foam. So it manages condensation in a similar way to interior spray foam. So my students have heard me talk about this all the time, but there's only 4 approaches to dealing with condensation in building design. You can either warm the condensing surface, like with exterior insulation, if we're talking about the sheathing here. You can prevent usually moisture-laden air from reaching the cold surface. And that's kind of what we're talking about here. You can dehumidify, which is typically unrealistic to the extent that we would need to stop all problems in buildings. Although we sometimes do that a little bit. And then the 4th approach is to allow the condensation to occur, but provide sufficient drying. And we're doing a little bit of both, I guess, in this. We're maybe allowing a little drying through the tape and mostly preventing interior moisture-laden air from reaching the condensing surface. So that is how it works. That is obviously a pretty complicated marketing message. And so I can understand why it's difficult to communicate that. We do actually have problems with Zip-R that are kind of counterintuitive. Can I keep going on this? How long can I talk?
No, this is good.
Just keep going? Okay.
That's why I'm not interrupting you.
All right. So here's where it could potentially be a problem. And this is where I'm not going to get the job from Huber here. Not really. So the potential problem is if we don't use Zip-R that's thick enough for our climate zone. So and this could be a real problem. Let's say you're a builder in climate zone 6 and you want to make a modest improvement to your building, but you don't want to go sort of all in, or you don't have the budget to, or you don't really have a great understanding of building science or insulation, and you want to make a modest improvement. So you want to take a step in the direction of improving what you're currently doing. So you spec Zip-R, but you just use I don't even know what thicknesses they come in, 1 inch of the stuff.
Yep.
If you only use 1 inch of the stuff, now you really can have a problem because you haven't eliminated your condensing surface. You've just created a new one. So you have to use enough. This is same as spray foam. And actually a lot of your listeners probably have seen this problems like this with flash and bat, where you do the flash and bat approach to roofs or walls, and you're, say, in Boston, and your spray foam contractor comes up short, and you end up rotting your sheathing out because you haven't used enough of it. So that is a real concern, and it's not intuitive because you think you're making an improvement, but you actually have now increased risk, not decreased risk. So you have to do enough of it to reduce your risk. Fortunately, what is enough of it? Enough of it is the same percentages recommended in the building code for spray foam.
Yeah. And it actually goes up a little bit by climate zone too, right? In the code, it's like, I think in climate zone like 4 and 5, it's like 30%. And then like you get up to like climate zone 7, it's closer to like 40 or 50%. Like and it's not an exact ratio. You check the code, but it's close to that ratio.
And actually, speaking of climate zone 7, that's one place I wouldn't do this. It's really cold up there. Or climate zone, I wouldn't do it in Alaska. It's too cold. Dude, this is a great, great, great solution in like mildly cold and to cold. But in very cold places, do exterior insulation. Don't do zip R. It's not for everywhere.
Yeah. That is a good answer. I think we answered Sean's question.
Yeah. What else did he ask? He asked something. Anyway, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
Pretty good, Sean. Pretty good.
Okay. The next one is from someone named Noah, not my son, I'm assuming. Especially since this one's addressed directly to Pete, but I know Pete answered this question in an email. So sometime in the next year or so, I will be starting to build my own house. I'm debating on what foundation type I will go with. I heard you guys mention a rat slab and a crawl space in one podcast. And the three of you didn't seem like that was that big of an idea for you. What's the reason for not liking a rat slab? I'll say that it's a waste of money. Rat slab is like you pour concrete without really treating it. And so if I do a crawl space and I don't want the crawl space to be part of my conditioned building, what do you think about putting zip sheathing on the bottom side of my floor trusses? Would I still need a vapor barrier? I'm also going to tell you Noah doesn't go on to tell us what climate zone he's in, so we have a little bit there. But the general question here is, would you rather see a vapor barrier in the form of 6 mil poly on the bottom side of floor trusses or zip sheathing on the bottom side of floor trusses?
Say it again. On the bottom side of floor trusses, he's saying zip or
6 mil poly as his vapor barrier.
Neither. I would not do this. I mean,
because he's trying to exclude the crawl space from his building.
Yes. Why?
Yeah. So there's the first question.
Okay. So I wouldn't. I don't like crawl spaces. They're gross, and it's hard to keep them nice. And I have a crawl space, but it's included and conditioned, and it's it's beautiful, Jake. It's a gorgeous. You should come and see my crawl space.
Okay,
if you have time.
I'll accept the invitation.
It's a great crawl space.
This is what dorks talk about. Come and look at my crawl space.
I do. I showed when my father came to visit me here. The first thing I showed him was my crawl space. Probably close to the first thing.
Before grandchildren?
No, he's still very kids first. He's not a total monster, but he was very interested in the crawl space.
He does speak lovingly about your grandchildren. His grandchildren, by the way.
They actually, it's pretty cute. So my older son picked up his book that I have on a low shelf and looked at it, and it points at the back cover and says, "Grandpa, Grandpa." Mm-hmm. It's very cute, very, very sweet. Anyway, crawl spaces. I would not. It sounds like this is new construction, so I just wouldn't do a crawl space like this. I wouldn't count on. I'm trying to think of a reason to do this. Maybe I talked with my students last class on Tuesday about resiliency in design, and maybe if you're in a flood zone and you're building essentially an elevated building. Yep. So, but
then we'd be ruling out 6 mil poly right away, right? We'd be looking for something that's permanent on the bottom. So you're saying if you're building like on piers, you'd have an open crawl.
Exactly. I mean, it's not a crawl space; it's a space.
Yeah,
just otherwise known as outside the building.
Yeah. So then that would make perfect sense that we wouldn't be considering using something like poly. We would be using something that would be solid and able to be air sealed. So zip might be really high on the list at that point.
Yeah, I like the idea of using zip in that it's easy to seal and make it airtight. And
it'll hold up whatever insulation we put in the trusses with ease. You know?
Yes. And is that going to be dry enough? I don't actually know. It has a permeance of about 10 or so. but that could be a really wet environment. I mean, how well ventilated is it? I don't know that we know all of the information, but anytime I'm asking a question or I'm asked to review something where I have to sort of parse that level, I would say, let's look at alternatives. So I wonder what Peter said. Listen to Peter. My answer is listen to Peter.
And so I think I'm 100% on the same page with you here. I think my first recommendation would be that crawl space would be a decent place probably to run ductwork if it were inside the building, if it were encapsulated and it were just a really short basement.
Yeah.
Like you wouldn't think about insulating the bottom side of the floor trusses if it were 8 feet tall.
Right.
So why is it that if it's 4 feet tall, we automatically just go, oh, it's outside?
Yeah. Condition the crawl space, insulate the crawl space, insulate the perimeter, and call it a day. I'll add though, I've had this conversation with some people in our sort of world here. I think it was Tim Euler maybe was talking about how they don't condition their crawl space because they have concerns about radon in their area. So I wonder what's motivating this preference. And maybe it's radon related. I will say that radon is a concern here in Blacksburg as well. And so if that's the concern, we mitigated it just fine using a passive vent through the house. This is hard to describe to people who are listening and are unfamiliar with these types of systems, but radon is a very harmful soil gas. You can test for it, but you want to mitigate it if it's in your area. And this is sort of a good idea to do this anyway. Anyway, you can alleviate the problem by providing some sort of drainable surface underneath the floor of your crawl space, so underneath the poly, if that's what you've laid down, and like gravel, and you insert a perforated pipe underneath that, and the code will give you recommendations.
I think it's 3 feet each direction with a perforated pipe and a T.
Like
yep.
Now, if your building is really big or your footprint is really big, you might want to exceed what the code is recommending.
Because it does just say one, which means you could have a 7,000 square foot house with one penetration.
Right. I did a 10,000 square foot footprint house. And so we just kind of decided to do some extra there. And radon's also not the only soil gas. There's other bad stuff that we don't test for. So this is
some even that just smell.
Yeah.
That aren't harmful, that just smell that you don't want in the building. So
you put this perforated pipe in through the gravel and then put a solid pipe running vertically out the building through the roof, and it'll just vent passively. So what you're doing is essentially making the easiest path for soil gas to be through this pipe as opposed to through your house.
Yeah. Code also requires an outlet close to the pipe so that a fan can be added at some point, so that it's powered. That's right. It's powered close to it. And we always put them in the attic so that the fan would have greatest draw, because it's already getting stack effect to that point. And the other thing to note is that most lenders will require, if you're purchasing a used home, a radon test before you can get in, at least in high radon areas, they'll require a radon test before you can purchase the home. But that low radon reading only is for when the test happened. Radon levels fluctuate over day to day. They fluctuate with barometric pressure. You should have active readings in your house to know whether or not radon is an issue, because radon is the second largest cause of lung cancer in the United States.
So I was sort of laughing until you said lung cancer, and then it was no longer funny. Thanks, Jake. But laughing a little bit.
Buzzkill.
Real buzzkill. But I was laughing a little bit because we bought our house. If it helps,
it's worse in children and the elderly.
Oh, thank you. It's so much better, Jake. So when we bought our house here in Blacksburg, where radon is a concern, what they make you do is do a test if you renovate the house. If you touch anywhere, I think in the crawl space, they'll make you do the test, or as part of pre-purchasing. Anyway, it's part of we had to do it a number of times. Anyway, the first time we did the test, they failed the test, and this was before we'd actually even purchased this. It was part of the pre-purchase stuff, and I wasn't too concerned about failing the test because I knew that I wanted to condition the crawl space. It's like the first thing. I just knew I was like, this crawl space needs to be conditioned. We're going to do it. So I wasn't concerned that they failed the test. But what had me kind of laughing a little bit is the response to the failed test was, oh, don't worry about it. Just repeat the test. When we did the test, it had been raining for a week. So just repeat the test
when it's dry.
I was like, well, the test isn't
I'm not trying
helpful
to cheat
when it's I don't want to cheat it. I don't want to die. So anyway, it's sort of funny how people try to game the system. And sometimes I get gaming the system because some parts of the code are cumbersome and seem silly, but this is a really good one. This is what you should listen to.
This is a health and safety part of the code. I saw recently someone had tagged me on a building post on Instagram, and they were showing monitoring equipment that they put in all their new construction builds. And they were showing the equipment that it was the Air Things, the pill-shaped air quality monitor.
Oh, yeah.
And on the left-hand side, it said radon, and it said 17 for the whole time that he was standing there talking. And I was like, 4, and I think it's part per million, but it's a radiation reading, so it's not parts per million. But 4 is like dangerous high, and it said 17 the whole time he was talking. And I was like, is he not going to acknowledge that that's exponentially higher than, like, that's crazy high? Why is he not explaining that he shouldn't even be in the building with it that high? And then I commented, like, I think the radon's a little high in that brand new building that you just built. And then somebody immediately responded with, he's in Canada. And I was like, oh, they use a different system for measurement.
Different measurement.
Oh, it's a different measurement. And I was like, oh, sorry, this is, I live in the States. Like, I totally don't understand what
you could take that a lot of ways, though. He's in Canada, and Canadians deserve to die. Like, or we're
maybe
immune.
That's what they meant. Canadians are immune to radon. They all have lung cancer anyway.
Yeah.
I think they still smoke in Canada. I don't know. Whatever it meant. But I was just like, I was panicking, like waiting for him to say something about, and whoever buys this house from us is clearly going to die from lung cancer. But
that's why it's for sale.
Yeah, that's why we're selling it. So
6 feet under.
Okay, so I guess my last question is, how do we convince you to start putting things on Instagram again?
How many of your listeners want to come and be my nanny?
Okay. Well, now I will make sure that in the show notes we put Christine's email address at Virginia Tech, and you can apply for a job. Christine, thank you for taking the time to participate in the podcast today.
That's it? I did it?
That's it.
We're good?
You did it. Seriously, though, thank you. And thanks for letting me sit in on your class today.
Thanks for coming. Virginia Tech is a great school.
So, okay. Till next time, if you have questions at theunbuilditpodcast.com. And thanks for listening. Have a good day.